think you highlighted exactly.
Yeah, we ain't down with her.
I think you highlighted exactly the concern. Why would just the swing states exhibit a pattern? And so that's a huge red flag because what wins you elections? It's the swing states. Before, Harris exceeded Biden in Wisconsin, North Carolina, and Georgia. I believe those numbers are up to date.
Guys, if we have that graphic, Coach Rowe,
number for you just to kind of show you how the theory that she's unpopular and that's why she would be underperforming doesn't add up. And that's that she got 99.6% of all the votes cast in 2020, the Democratic votes that turned up in 2020 for those 7 swing states. She got 99.6% of them in 24. So it doesn't make sense that she would be underperforming by a large amount in these states, but then get 99.6% of the same votes.
So, okay, so with that, you believe that something was done to the voting machines? Do you believe that, like, for instance, I've heard people, and I'm not a conspiracy theorist, and when people, I'm very skeptical when people throw it. I've heard people say, hey, wait a minute, people were using Starlink to transmit the data, the voting data from precincts to the state elections board, and that Starlink, of course, owned by Elon Musk. Of course, Joe Rogan made this famous phrase that Elon Musk created this app that an hour after the polls closed showed, oh, Trump is going to win, I'm going to sleep. And he was like, man, how did he know? And then, of course, Trump, leading up to the election, was like, hey, don't worry about it. We don't need your votes. We got this. So people are pointing to those things as evidence that something was amiss.
We pulled this data and we did this analysis. In 2020, up until about 450 to 500 votes counted by machine or cast at the machines, it looks normal.
Right. So that's that. 500. Go ahead. Okay. Then 500, all of a sudden, red above 55%.
Right. We see separation.
Okay.
And so what's interesting is if you kind of break this down into the correlation or the trend, as more votes were cast at higher populations, the Republican Party benefited. And so what was weird about this is in 2020, what was weird about this is counterintuitive to how voting patterns normally are. Well, one, you don't generally see a trend as more votes are cast. You just see a better reflection of how people, generally feel.
Okay.
And the problem is Democrats generally benefit at high populations because they live in high populated areas. So this makes very little sense for either of those reasons.
So you see these gaps.
Separation.
Yes. And so you're not supposed to see separation like this. And when we pull out the distribution, the slide we were looking at before, you can go, I think, two slides or so, you had the bell curve slide. And I'll show you exactly why this is concerning and what this potentially means. Yeah, but there's a little bit of weirdness at the top.
Election day gets a bell curve pattern.
I can say we looked at Washoe County, which was the other county in Clark County, Nevada, and we do see the same issue, more aggressive for Election Day there and in 2020. So what we're thinking potentially happened, if you go to the next distribution slide, we look at early voting, but for this type of graph.
This here?
Here, perfect. So this, as I said, when you look at this statistically, and we have, so in the Election Truth Alliance, we have people with experience in statistics, data analysis. We have, people with medical and engineer degrees. We have a little bit of everything.
They cheated again.
And so what we've done is we said, instead of this matching a normal distribution like you would expect to see, it shows potential manipulation. And what's concerning is, if we look at the top one, there's a concept here where if you want to win an election, or in this case, for voting data and distribution, the further right a majority of your votes are, after the 50% mark, you win. That's how you win in this case. And so what we're seeing, specifically in early voting, because it's so aggressive, we're seeing that a portion of the distribution is missing. And so this suggests, since in this case, this is candidate Trump, it suggests that his distribution shows that he's benefiting from potential manipulation. That votes, if you look at the bottom, Harris is missing a portion of hers, and since she's at a lower percentage, we see that skew. And so the way this could indicate is it has a rightward skew, and Trump has a leftward skew. And a leftward skew, or another term, is a Russian tail. And so a Russian tail is a term coined by Russian data scientists, data analysts, in reference to a few different potentially manipulated Russian elections. And so they coined the term of a leftward skew, like if you go up, and I believe we also have a reference in this document, but potentially moving votes around, you're going to have this leftward skew like we're seeing in Clark County, Nevada for early voting. So what's interesting is when people talk about election night, there's an expected pattern you see as votes come in because of time zones. And so Smart Elections actually recently posted a video on their YouTube, and it was referencing someone talking about what you would expect to see on election night. And so generally, like the Northeast, as their polls close, they're more Democrat, so you would see a little bit of a blue lead. And then Florida would come in, and it would go red. And then you would get the middle Rust Belt areas, and it would go a little deeper red. And then the West Coast would come in last, and you'd see that blue wave resurface, right? And so you'd see a little bit of a red mirage is what it is. What's interesting is this election night, you didn't see that. And what you saw is after the first bit of votes came in, it stayed very positive for the Republicans, and it only grew. You didn't see a bounce back. You didn't see a resurgence. And so some people would quote that to see it almost looked algorithmic in the way the votes slowly crept up. And what's concerning is, as you mentioned before, how could you have done this if you could have done this? So I get this a lot, especially with my background. People talk about, our election is secure. Our election isn't hackable. We spent 4 years arguing, everything's good. And so what's funny is when you actually look at our election systems, it's not that our election systems are secure or they're not. It's that every state runs their own election. We have a few different types of machines, and we have paper trails. And that's how we should be securing our elections. The problem is, let's actually look at how every state runs their elections. All of them have different procedures. There's no standard guideline for how you should do it.
Right.
But even then, they still have checks and balances they take account. The problem is we only really use, for our tabulation machines and our voting machines, we only really have two main brands. And both of them, as we found in the last little bit of our analysis, both of them, I think 70% of the vote counting machines used in the country for elections have had issues of cybersecurity specialists mentioning potential vulnerabilities. And so as you asked before, how would you do this? Well, you would, as you said, I think you would do it at the tabulation level. So some states, they have voting machines and then they transfer their votes, or they scan in paper ballots. And the tabulators are what's doing all that work. And so, as I said, there's two main brands. And if you were to compromise those tabulators, you could change the outcome of an election because you could just change votes. And it's that simple. Or you could change the data in transit from the tabulators. Either way would look the same on paper. We actually have to use them. This election, I think there were 3 substantial audits that I looked at, Arizona, Georgia, and Pennsylvania. And all 3 of those audits, in my opinion, were not effective in doing what they needed to do, which was to validate the presidential race. Pennsylvania conducted I believe it was a risk limiting audit for maybe 2%, and they did the Treasury. And they didn't even poll an appropriate amount of Philadelphia, which is like over 10% of their voting population. So it's things like that where if you don't set standards for what would actually catch manipulation, like we're saying potentially happened, and we're seeing indication of with the statistical evidence. And as I said, we're working on Pennsylvania and doing a statistical analysis like this, and I recently posted a video where we're seeing the same trend of as more votes are counted, the Republicans start to lead as if a change was occurring in Philadelphia, and in Erie County. And so
and Milwaukee.
I think the problem is if you spent 4 years discrediting election integrity, because that's the difference. This is an election denial. This is election integrity.
Right.
It's not that we want to question the results. We want to validate that our machines are accurate, and that's why you should do audits. It's not about anything else. And so these
Which
audits were not efficient. These audits did not pass standards, and they didn't even